Okay, the appointed time having arrived, I will call this meeting of the Economic Development Committee for Tuesday, June 2nd to order. Record will show all members are in attendance. And before we get started, I just want to say that, as always, public comment is welcomed here. I do try to keep most of the discussion among the members of the committee, so, questions and comments from the public are welcome. Just don't want to, get into a long, prolonged discussion or argument or whatever, but you're welcome to come up, no problem at all. Our first item of business is approval of the minutes from our meetings of this year of 3/19, 4/8, and 5/5. I would welcome a motion to approve these.
I'll move to approve.
I have a motion from Rasmussen. Do I have a second? I have a second from Killian. Did anybody see anything of concern? Questions, concerns, changes? Seeing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that passes. Thank you. Well, before moving on to item number 2, which we'll turn over to Mr. Schock to kind of walk us through, I just want to say that it seems that tonight's Economic Development Committee will be the last one in which we will have Mr. Schock with us. And he has announced his retirement effective, I think, the 29th of this month.
Yeah.
And I personally hate to see him go, and I think a lot of other people do too. It's over the past few years, a lot of incredible things have happened in this city in terms of economic development. And Mr. Schock has been a prime mover in so many of those things. Often a thankless position because it puts him in a high-profile spot, and he becomes a target to detractors or naysayers or whatever. But he's always been the consummate professional, a joy to work with, and a relentless wit. And I will sorely miss him and hate to see you go. But I certainly wish you the best.
Thank you.
And are you really going to be living in Central America?
Yeah. Come visit.
There you go. All right, well, item number 2 on our agenda is discussion and possible action on the update of city's request for proposal, RFP template. So, Mr. Schock.
Yep, I'm pleased to introduce Sean Fitzgerald, our new business development specialist, as you know, that we introduced at past meeting. Sean's been working on revising and updating, the RFP template, and wanted to, with the committee's feedback, continue to craft and, alter that as you see fit. So, down here, which I think you can speak into this one if you want.
Is there, how about if I come down here so I have a desk area?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, everyone. This, as Mr. Schock indicated, this is an element that really came out of, I guess, something that a procedure process the city should review every few years. But there's been some questions about, how the RFP process vets various proposals that come forward. And this is really an opportunity to take a look at how that process is done, what kind of components can be put into the process to help give the staff a better idea of the project so that the staff can then introduce to the committee and ultimately to council members those projects that make the most sense for the city's strategic goals. So what we have today is really just intended to be a discussion about what the process has been and what some options for it to be or could be in the future. This is not intended, by the way, to discuss the tax incremental finance application process. The mayor and I have had some conversations about that, and that is going to be something that we'll tackle at a different time. Right now, this is strictly related to the RFP process, but you should have in your packet a kind of a sample copy of the requests for proposals as they're given out right now. There's some very generic information in there that outlines how they're done at the end. a point system that was used previously to evaluate proposals as they came in, that had been modified 3 years ago in 2017 when this process was last revisited. But as I indicated in the memo to the committee here, just a couple of things to keep in mind, obviously as the city is taking a look at evaluating these proposals. These kind of projects really do one of 5 things, and I think it's important to reiterate these. Remediate and redevelop a blighted parcel of property. The proposal can also meet city strategic goals for adding targeted housing within the community, add more value to taxable property, assist an employer with expansions that can create jobs locally, obviously just liquidate extraneous real estate that the city owns, and achieve other city strategic goals for the enhancement of the community's amenities, things like lift stations and street widenings, those kinds of amenities. So below here are 7, I guess, suggestions that have come up to kind of get the conversation started. There's obviously a lot, many more options of things that can be added to the RFP process in terms of providing more vetting. The list that's here is based on just some general research that's been done into probably about 10 to 15 other communities and things that they incorporate into their RFP process as well. So with that, I'm going to back off and kind of leave it open to some general discussion from the committee.
Yeah, Ms. Rasmussen?
Just a couple questions. I've got, I see that one of the proposals is to go back to a scoring panel, which we had before, where each proposal was awarded points based on facets of the RFP with, that it fulfilled and to the degree that it fulfilled them. We kind of had gravitated in the last few years away from that so that we had some flexibility to entertain unique proposals that were not necessarily cookie cutter approach. I think that said, I think we could still allow ourselves some, ability to be nimble in the process without not scoring proposals. But is the vision that the committee would be scoring the proposals, or would the staff development team be scoring the proposals? Because my understanding before was that the staff development team was doing the scoring. We on the committee floor were not scoring proposals. Would we continue with that practice?
Yeah, and I think my understanding of the practice previously was that it was a collection of staff members. I don't know if it was the finance director, community development. I think some people outside of community development, but
It was an
essentially,
internal team, though, not-
essentially it was
Right.
a series of recommendations then that came back to the committee based on that scoring process.
Right.
So
But
yeah, I don't.
that team seldom contained alders, though, I guess is where
Correct.
I was
Okay.
going with that. Once in a
Okay.
while, an alder person or a council president would sit on a selection panel and score a proposal, often to select a vendor perhaps, but not necessarily individual development projects. We were not involved in that prior to them appearing on the committee floor. The vetting was done prior to it getting here. And so it was, ready for discussion and action when it got to us, and we weren't involved at that early stage. So is our plan to continue with that, I guess?
Yeah, and really, this is just set up to be an open discussion. So I think
Okay.
that can be part of the solution if the council and ultimately, or the committee and ultimately the council would desire.
I think the scoring process originally was used to see if it even warranted committee action or attention, because if it scored low to start with, there was no point. And so that was weeding stuff out early on.
Right, yeah. And I think, would it be fair to say, Mr. Schock, a lot of that vetting is essentially used elements of the scoring system, but those kind of projects are vetted out of even making the committee agenda.
Yeah, I think in most cases, anything that was received as a proposal would of course be included for the committee's review, but then along with, some color as to what the staff team was contemplating, and the way, and its competitiveness.
Alder Watson?
I like the idea of the scoring system and with staff involved, but would it be possible to get the alder in the district, similar to the criteria one? Like the alder person would get the RFP early on, just to review it, but then could that alder also participate in the scoring committee?
I think it's a good idea myself. I could just interject one thing about scoring, and not to say scoring is a bad thing, but a lot of times it bewilders me. A zillion years ago, I studied statistics and all that, and did all the horrible statistics, work that, took forever. But in scoring systems, you find, like, if it's like 1 through 5, for instance, 2 and 4 generally mean nothing. 1, I hate it, 3, I don't know, and 5, I love it. And any given 1 or any given 5 can skew results amongst, various scorers and that sort of thing. This kind of thing we're talking about, these proposals can include so many dynamics, and they can, from one to another, be, radically different from each other. And, a numerical scoring system, might have its place somewhere in, reviewing a proposal, but I just don't see it as a great determiner. I like to see, recommendations based on merits and observations and, potential return on the effort. So, sure, go ahead.
And I guess being the teacher background, like a good rubric to assess the RFP would be good, something that can help with consistency, but also be able to say, here, this is how we evaluated it, instead of just saying this is how we plucked it out. So, it could be more descriptive. Instead of 1 through 5, you could have descriptive rankings and then just average them.
Right.
Something like that.
Qualify more than quantify is how I would see it. So, Mr. Killian.
Yes, I would echo Alder Watson's sentiment about the alder person that is in the district of the proposed project. I think often the representative of the people often has the best handle on the council, not always, but often on what those residents and constituents' desires are or concerns. And I think that would be positive. And on that note, I think any aspect that would bridge the gap between economic development and community development would be very positive. And I think from a marketing perspective, ROI and return on investment, it hinges on what you define as return and what you define as investment before you can make such a calculation. So on that note, I would like to see, as I've suggested on other components of city policy, environmental justice integrated into the criteria so that we would use income and minority statistics, much as proposed by the EPA and other federal agencies, to make sure that areas of low wealth and people of neighborhoods with greater communities of color, people of color, that economic development is not adversely impacting them, and that whatever financial gain there may be for the city, it doesn't result in a drawback for citizens. So that would be my one input on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the committee? Anything else from staff?
I think it's just fair to say, taking some notes, taking your considerations down, we'll bring this back next month. That's a bit more refined, and see if the committee wants to go any further on kind of accepting a new process or modifications, at least, to the process that's occurred.
On the concern of environmental issues, we know that, the nature of our city is one of a long, industrial past, various types of industry here, ranging from lumber to tanneries and things like that. So whatever can be done in this RFP template to sort of pre-address potentials and suggested steps or what have you, responsibilities, that sort of thing should just be clearly, I think, included in that right up front, you know, kind of like get it out there so it doesn't kind of sneak up later. Yeah. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. Just one final point then, I guess. When we were looking at the old scoring matrix, I mean, we had an example in the packet for how 100 points was awarded before. And, you know, it had to do with the variety of uses that complement the area, maximizing taxable value, offering a reasonable purchase price, the speed with which it can be constructed, and the quality of design and construction practice, you know, to make that impact. Tom's comments about environmental justice are well taken, but I think environmental in general, I mean, environmental justice, looking at the impact on minority populations is one thing, but environmental concerns are quite another. And we recognize that in the past, we've come up with a number of projects in response to RFP that are intending to construct in areas that are challenging. And so as part of our scoring rubric, I would like to see us address or at least award some points for projects that either remediate or, you know, find a safe use or safe reuse for environmentally challenged sites. You know, I can think of a half dozen of them right now where if we had had points for that, that would have made our decisions more credible. So as we're looking at that scoring matrix, we also should look at if there's environmental factors on the sites. Because if there are, and one project addresses those better than another, or needs less assistance in doing it than another to get to the same end, we would value that, I think. And we've not looked at that before.
Thank you. Anything else from the committee? Okay, we look forward to seeing this come back in a refined state and maybe acting on it at that time. Item number 3, discussion and possible action on the issuance of a request for proposal, RFP, for various city-owned parcels in the near north area around 2nd and Bridge Streets and 3rd Street near Short Street. You'll recall, of course, that we have had one proposal delivered to us, and we had encouraged staff to go back to that proposer to discuss further. No action being taken. But what came up in our discussions was, you know, why don't we, you know, in the meantime, you know, get this out there and make sure that it's, you know, public knowledge that these are available and see if we can't lure some more interest. So, Mr. Schock or Mr. Fitzgerald?
Yep, that's what we've done. So you'll see just a draft there, you know, for your input. Basically, you know, clarifying that all of these parcels have been owned by the city. We acquired them through a variety of different channels, and they would be available, you know, for redevelopment in some cohesive way. You know, some of these parcels had been included in past RFP rounds, some hadn't. So, you know, to be clear and to, as the chairman noted, you know, allow any proposal to be reviewed cohesively, we've put together this RFP.
And I guess important to point out that, you know, this is not an all or nothing, but, you know, these could be proposed in part and parcel or
Correct.
in its entirety. So, questions from the committee? Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I have just one. Some of these parcels were included in a former RFP that we did not act upon, right? That drew a proposal from Blanker.
Correct.
That we did not act on. So if we go back to RFP, are you going to require them to reapply if they're still interested in the
Correct.
project?
Correct.
Okay, because my question was, what do you do with the proposals you had?
Correct. I believe they are still interested in the project, but, you know, like from a staff perspective, we wanted to be, you know, clear that, you know, that this is an exhaustive, you know, search for any other interest in the parcels. And so
Right.
this allows another window of opportunity for any other builder, developer, interested party to step forward and express interest in these properties. But we also want to, you know, be somewhat responsive to the timeline. You know, there is interest in, you know, in building additional housing. They likely would build it this year, so we want to be, you know, we want to you know, respond to the construction window to allow decisions to be made, if you wish to make a decision this year, so that they could, you know, they could build something this year if possible.
Right. I think part of our point in not acting last time was that we were looking for a variety of proposals, not just one. And, then we also wanted to hammer out the details of the one we did receive in terms of the money. So that would be good if we just start fresh.
That was our thought, yep.
Okay.
Maybe to interject a little element of competitiveness too.
Right.
in
Do you
the
need a motion to
marketplace.
move this forward?
Well, that would be it, yes.
Okay, then I'll move to issue this RFP and see what we get for a response.
Thank you. Second. I have a second from Watson. Further discussion? Mr. Killian?
Just one brief question. Has the neighborhood been consulted at all yet on how they feel about potential development or any involvement process yet? Or is the idea to get the proposals and then determine what the public involvement process will be?
Yeah, there had not been any plan specifically for public engagement per se, or public hearings other than the norm in our open meetings. Are you thinking that we need to do something special or out of the norm?
Well, I'll defer to the chair and the committee on that, my colleagues. Nothing out of the norm. I was just wondering if people had been asked.
Mr. Schock, any response to that?
No, I don't believe so, not in a cohesive way. I mean, we've heard from, interested parties. We've done a lot of work in this neighborhood, as many of you know. And so there's already been a lot of dialogue going on, the acquisition of Savo Supply, the acquisition of many of the parcels along 3rd Street, and then the first phase of the townhomes being completed, and then now the second phase of the townhomes on 2nd Street are being completed. So this would be a continuation of that. Obviously, we've had dialogue with Bridge Community because it would replace their garden parcel with, infill, infill housing of some kind. But yes, I wouldn't say there's been, a neighborhood meeting or anything like that at this point.
Now, I will acknowledge that, this is in my district, and it is a neighborhood that has, for a long time, been in a lot of distress. Falling apart in large part. I would suspect that neighbors would be really happy and open to, seeing things, brought around. So, but, I mean, in our open meetings way of doing business, it will be made public, and, I don't know that we will have any door-to-door or special hearings or that sort of thing, but we'll take it under advisement. Anything else from the committee?
I have just one comment. My experience, I guess, with neighborhoods and neighborhood groups with development is often, once you have at least some proposals that you can show them, the feedback you get from them is so much more constructive. Because if you have just a map and no concept, and you bring them in, or you go to the neighborhood group with that, often they're confused by why you're there. And so the feedback that I receive a lot in my area is, show me what you want to build, and then I'll tell you how I feel about that. And so if you have 2 or 3 proposals that you could show to the public or show to a neighborhood group, at least then they know that you want their input on something, like yes or no, or could this be better, is it good enough? Where if we are too soon on that, they just kind of give up on it. They don't, until they know what it's going to be. So, but I think that there's room for, once we get proposals in, and we have proposals to consider on the committee floor, if we have a neighborhood group in an area, or even if we don't, there's room to call a neighborhood's attention to something that's about to be discussed. And I think through good communication, whether they come here and see it, or whether they don't want to take time out of their day to come here and see it, the proposals are online also. And so I think we could invite feedback either in the context of our meeting, or we could invite feedback prior. But, I think there's room for that without a formal public hearing.
And, with the concern about the construction season window, if you will, you want to, be as agile and, fleet-footed as you can, and still,
Right. But
not-
say a message went out to maybe
Right.
that neighborhood, if they had a neighborhood group, and say, hey, neighborhood group, keep this on your radar. These proposals are under consideration, weigh in, and whether they call us individually, or whether they email us, or stop
Yeah.
here, or whatever.
This would
You
be
know,
the athletic park neighborhood group. So,
Right, so, if most of our neighborhoods now have an organized group that we can go to, I mean, now they're not meeting with COVID-19, but, I think if we have a group leader that maybe can reach out to them either through Nextdoor or other means, we might still be able to get feedback without going to their meeting. So,
And I still think, the good communication with our local media, electronic and traditional paper, is great if we can get, the visuals out there for people to kind of pre-digest. And then, with that invitation, contact, chair of the committee or your alderperson or whatever with your concern. And, it's an honest effort to get it out there.
right.
Okay, thank you. So have we had a motion on this yet?
Yeah, and
Okay.
you need to vote.
Okay, so any further discussion? Oh, it was Mr. Killian's fault for, making us prolong. So I'm just kidding. All right, all in favor of releasing the RFP, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Number 4, discussion and possible action on the proposals received for 1300 Cleveland Street, former city incubator site property. Mr. Schock?
Great, yes. So within the packet, you'll see we have received the 4 proposals that are summarized, and we included a small staff report just to give you an idea about, some of the considerations and to kind of generally summarize the proposals and their nature. We think, obviously the city has worked to reposition Cleveland Street for a while now with various, kind of steps towards the goal that we are at today with an actual reviewing of tangible proposals. We've had dialogue about what to do with the property. We've gone through 2 phase 1s, assessments on the property. And so today we're at a, junction point to kind of make a determination or get your feedback on what you'd like to take in next steps for this parcel. We do think there's opportunity to work with the different proposers to accommodate some of the different projects together on the site. So it's not necessarily just a versus B decision, but we believe that there's opportunity to work with the proposers to bring together a solution that will incorporate at least, 2 or 3 of the different proposals, in a way in which maximizes the property's impact for the city in the long haul, whether it be job creation or, following through on a strategic goal like adding affordable housing or the shared resource center, which has been a long-standing goal of the city to see accomplished. So those were the thoughts, I guess. You see in our recommendation, tonight we're trying to get your feedback mainly to determine what would be the next steps that you'd like to see before a decision was made, assuming that maybe you wouldn't be in a position to make a decision tonight per se, but rather what are you looking for? What other considerations would you like to consider before making that decision? And then, going ahead and getting those accomplished so that you are able to make a recommendation shortly.
Well, just from the get-go, we obviously are not in a position to, pick one of the 4 proposals tonight, mainly because they're kind of fluid at this point. From discussion I had with you last week, it just seemed that some of the proposers were sort of speaking amongst themselves about possible, cooperative efforts and that kind of thing, and those cooperative efforts haven't come through, in a cohesive manner for us to consider. So that's kind of like percolating in the background while we're sitting here talking about it. So no, we're not going to be acting on one of those proposals tonight. I wouldn't welcome a motion to do so.
But any feedback you have
Sure.
would help color the discussions. They have all, or most of them have met with each other or met, to coordinate, and we've encouraged that coordination. The development team, mayor and development team have encouraged the parties to meet and to work together to, see where there's collaboration opportunities. So, your input and color, obviously, many of them are either listening in or are here this evening, so your feedback is helpful in then guiding, how the final product might be crafted.
Okay, well, maybe we can get our discussion going on the first bullet point under the recommendations of complete any additional testing required by the committee. The things that come to mind there are, first of all, in the proposals we received, environmental issues come up and are sort of offered to be dealt with in different ways. We would have to see what, any future refined proposals say about that, because, I don't want to sit here and say, yes, we're going to do this or that testing without, knowing, what the proposer might, care to do. Testing is a tough thing to consider when you have to decide, well, where specifically are you going to test and what are you going to test for? These are important considerations, and then what you can afford to do when you're doing that. So, but thoughts, and I see Alder Rasmussen has her hand up.
Thank you. When we last considered the idea of offering this parcel at all, one of the things I was concerned about, and, Mr. Killian was concerned about prior to his election, was what the real environmental quality of this site is. And I thought that we had decided that in parallel with the issuing of the RFP, that we were going to ask for not only an updated Phase 1, but a Phase 2 study to be started on this property. Now, at least one of these projects is habitational in nature. So we were pretty clear on the fact that if anybody is ever to live there, that we need to know a lot more about what's in there and what's been happening. Even though we think it's okay, we don't know for sure. So before I would be comfortable selecting any proposal that includes housing. An industrial application is different. Rail car storage, semi-trailer storage, that's totally different. But if they're proposing an apartment building, that's a whole different set of animals that we have to deal with. I will say, though, having sat for a number of months now on the police department's homelessness task force, which has just now turned its recommendations over to United Way to carry across the finish line. One of the key factors that we identified as a group of stakeholders working together was a need for the coordination of services to populations who need services and a total lack thereof. We have all kinds of great nonprofit organizations in the community that all are operating like little islands, and someone in need of services may have no idea what services are available, how to get them, or how to get to them. And so I was inspired when I saw the community partners proposal, because to house all of those things in close proximity where someone with needs can get through a process from start to finish and get help without traversing the city multiple times and missing opportunities because they've got no idea that some program is out there, that's what we need to attack homelessness. So in the interest of development, even though some others have offered more money for this site, we really have to, if we want to really take a bite out of our issues surrounding homelessness and our service to them, I think that our decision is less about money and more about what we can create there. And so I was excited to see that proposal. Now, in connection with that proposal, if we can work with Colby on some industrial use at the south end, or if you can accommodate the rail car issue at 3M in a different area, so that the entire site wasn't taken for that, if they can all work together, that makes sense. But I think we have to give serious credence to the community partner proposal. Yes, it's tax exempt and it's conveyed for $1, but the impact that can create for populations in need is tremendous. It's worth way more than the tax money we'd get out of it. So I think we have to think hard on that.
My question or questions to development are with respect to the combined services project. Is this the ideal or only footprint in town for that? Have we determined that this is where it needs to be, or this is just a place where it can be? And certainly with regards to the apartment proposal, is this the best place for that, and is there somewhere else better suited for it? Those questions really need to be clearly answered for us as well. Alder Watson.
I wonder too, with the parcels that we looked at just previously, like south of Ridge, is that something that you've pitched to the Dana Capital area for their, or
Yes.
is it not enough?
Yeah, so you're right, and that's a great question. There's a fine art to landing, what's considered low-income housing tax credits, and, there's a scoring matrix that WIDA uses to award those grants, the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Administration. And so, they, many of the developers of LIHTC projects are very adept at understanding what, the qualified census tract, the nature of the property, how many units hit that sweet spot of, the mixture of the units on the property. In this case, they're looking at doing an apartment complex and a townhome complex, which will serve kind of different population segments, right? So all of that is kind of considered in that mix. So we have mentioned the property or the properties in near north, although those are various scattered sites and smaller more incremental development. And there are other properties in the city that we've gone through. We are at a, to answer Tom's question as well, we're at a relatively record low in city-owned properties, at least for as far as we can, as far as records are kept, so we don't have a lot of properties, that are owned by the city and that could be leveraged for projects like the Shared Resource Center or like affordable housing, which normally is incentivized through the property acquisition process, either through some kind of ability to sweeten that deal. Affordable property or affordable housing is by its nature not affordable, and so oftentimes they are going to need or require some kind of local incentives as well as the state and LIHTC incentives that are going to be coupled together to make that project work. And if most of those projects have some kind of mixture, in the landmark, which we're working on currently, it will have historic tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, and a relatively large, $900,000 loan from the CDA to make that deal work, to kind of pencil it out, right?
So is there not a TIF district up there? Is that?
There is not, correct.
Okay.
Yep. Well, there is in the sense, TIF 6 is there, but TIF 6 is closing. So, that is the district that, the mandatory expenditure period on TIF 6 just closed right now. And, of course, funded Thomas Street and many of the other things in that area, but wouldn't be able to be an incentive for this property per se.
For the Cleveland?
Oh, sorry, and for Cleveland, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Because it said that they are looking for TIF.
Or other incentives, they
Or
did.
other, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So we've notified the proposal that no, there wouldn't be TIF unless you wanted to create a new TIF district, which, could be a discussion, but I think there are other incentives that we could leverage. And, perhaps there's other loans or other, incentives that would be part of the dialogue.
So I just have one more question, Mr. Chairman. So they really are, like all three are collaborating? Or all four? Or is it just a couple?
Yeah, I would say, well, all four have met, and I think, obviously the housing project and the Shared Resource Center project are both relatively large footprints. The other two are relatively smaller. So I think that the smaller footprints could easily pair with either one of the larger footprinted projects, depending on, kind of your feedback and then final discussions.
To say, I want to echo what Lisa said, the plans for the community center were just amazing. I was like,
Yes.
it's sort of a perfect place for it,
Yeah.
on the bus line, by St. Vincent's. It was, awesome.
All right. I saw Alder
Hey,
Rasmussen's
yep,
hand.
Just one more comment, and I think Sarah touched on it. Community Partners needs to be on a bus line. That is often how the population that needs the service is going to access the area if they can't afford to own a car. It's also in relatively close proximity to two warming centers. That said, we need that, and, and also containing a free clinic. I mean, we need to deliver those services where the need is. And so often you would see a proposal like this and think, well, where can we go with it? Well, people have to be able to get there, and it has to be, you have to take the service kind of to where the need is. And so that's why I think the Cleveland site is ideal for this, even if there's some other site in the city where it could go. I mean, it's a professional-looking building, it could go anywhere. But does it make the same impact if it's somewhere else? If we pick this up and carry it to the north side, it won't, because people who need to get there may not find it. So I think that, if we were going to, as far as an apartment project, we have apartment projects going all over town, and I think that we would be able to work with Dana Capital to find an alternative site if we needed to. I mean, that I think it's easier to find an alternative site for that project than for community partners. You know, and if community partners is able to work with the two smaller ones who are already really their neighbors to share a little bit here and there, a strip for this and a strip for that, I think that arrangement really could make a big impact, and not only on the neighborhood, but it'll make an impact on a population that the last two councils have committed to wanting desperately to make an impact on homelessness, but they've not been able to make a big enough impact. And the coalition's impact is kind of on a case-by-case basis. So, you know, they're addressing it case by case, but our population of people in need is growing exponentially larger. So fixing it one case at a time isn't fast enough. And so if we can provide a larger impact by centralizing these things, I think that, you know, I don't know if we even need closed session on this, because the money really is the least of it now. And we're looking at the impact and the land use more than the dollars, at least I am. So,
All right, thank you. Alder Killian had his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is my district on the southwest side, and this matter is of the highest importance for that area. I've got some references, if the chair will allow, that I'd like to use as I
Please
speak
do.
to some points.
Gets found. Yep. Just a sec.
Well, for the sake of efficiency, while that driver's installing, I'll mention a few points that are independent of that. So for this parcel, it's very near residential areas on Cleveland Avenue, Chellis, and also some side streets around there. So I think whatever proposal would move forward, if one moves forward, should probably incorporate some concerns and needs that have been conveyed to me by the residents who live around there. And whatever, each proposal would involve some additional traffic, whether it's foot traffic or vehicle traffic. And there's already very substantial lighting issues in that part of the neighborhood, meaning there's insufficient street lighting. Now, this causes a great deal of concern for residents. I discussed it with the Public Works Director as well as the Chief and Deputy Chief of the police, and this was going to be something that would be a priority around there anyway, but I think it would be really positive if we could integrate some of that into whatever happens here, because there will not be a level of sufficient comfort from the residents who live there if something's going to be developed there, because already there's a tremendous darkness in the evening. The other, I had received requests from residents around there, even though it tends to be a very safe, low crime area, for some additional police patrols should more development go in the area. And there are a lot of senior citizens who live on Cleveland Avenue, and unfortunately, and this is rare, but it just goes to show, one resident had a rock thrown through his window a week or two ago in the middle of the night, and I'm sure the absence of sufficient lighting does not help. But these are just issues, very basic issues, that if we could integrate some of those concerns with whatever we do, I think it would be very positive. And then also, the packet's very thorough, and so it wouldn't be possible to, I think, translate a lot of information, but I would request to the committee that if we could get a one-page summary perhaps of the 4 proposals in Hmong language, I would like to have that so that I could distribute it, or it could be available on the city website, so that those who prefer or are Hmong dominant in language preferences have the ability to review a summary of these proposals. How are we doing? Okay, there we go, Mr. Schock. The folder CFI ED, please. And then the ED references PDF, the second one, please. Oh, you're right there, yeah. And what I'd like to first start with is, and if we could just go to slide 2 when you have that, or page 2, I would echo a lot of the input of my colleagues already, Alder Rasmussen and Alder Watson, that the proposal, the community partners proposal, I think, one, there is a great need for such services in Wausau, and there's really a scarcity of services that are meeting those needs. So I really think this is very positive. I personally support that proposal. Now, what I would ask is just a few weeks to gather citizen input and questions. These are just being presented tonight, and that is my opinion after reviewing a lot of information, but I will heed citizen and constituent input. So I would ask the committee if we could have a couple weeks before any action is taken on that. And the second is environmental. Now, this site, the Connor Forest Industries property in general, and not just this piece of the parcel, it has quite a history, as I think we all know at this time. But I wanted to just briefly speak to a few things because I thought it would be more efficient for the committee than kind of a guess and check on certain things. So I think the chair brought up a very good point. When you have a long-standing industrial operation with a very notorious contamination history, where do you begin to test, both in the contaminants and the location? So fortunately, there was so much apprehension about the city even purchasing this property in the 80s that a compendium was put together, and this is from a consultant report that was given to the DNR roughly 1986. And as you can see, it includes materials used at Connor Forest Industries, Wausau, Wisconsin Cabinet Division. So it's kind of a large book. I actually flipped through it at the DNR offices in Madison when I was down there, but we should be able to request that book, or whoever's interested, and that will list some of the possible contaminants. And as you go through this G&M report, it also goes through other things that were used, like the glue, resin, and so forth, and tells what's in them. Could we move on a bit, Mr. Schock, please? Okay, and so this is one of interest too in 1986. So we've got this indemnification agreement from Connor. Now, I took a look at that agreement and I'd asked some questions, and one of my concerns is that in 1986 there was exploratory trenching done, and what they were looking for was buried components, things like barrels and other materials. Now, they didn't find any barrels intact, but they did find some crushed barrels. Now, unfortunately, and a bunch of other materials, metals and plastics and so forth. I do not think, based on the questions I had asked the city attorney's office recently, that this indemnification agreement covers any quote-unquote informal landfills or dumps that may still be on the property. So that's something to consider there, that there are things identified in these documents, in these trenches, that likely I don't think we want to see there, but there are big data gaps, meaning that there's really no documents showing that they were ever removed. Now, also, to the soil contamination and the indemnification agreement, this is very interesting because when they did the trenching, and boy, it would be easier for this committee if the DNR had been more rigorous in 1986, but they actually did not do the soil sampling that was planned in that plan. So they did the trenches, but no one took any samples for contamination. So that's just something to note. Could we please move on a little, Mr. Shaw? Thank you. Now, this is one that the public really knows about, and it's not specific to just this parcel, but the Connor property in general. The DNR had surveilled them because of an informant who told them they were dumping, and they did find out they were dumping on the property, and when the DNR did an estimate they thought that over 4 years, roughly 92,000 gallons of glue had been dumped on the former Connor property. It included various metals and so forth. Could we move to the next one, please? Now, this is, I guess, of importance to the committee. So that was the early 80s, and they were supposed to remediate fully what they called a glue landfill. And when they did do the trenching in 86, the DNR had requested they trench through that former landfill, and unfortunately, they still found glue resin mixed with sawdust. So one thing we would want, I think, confirm is that that glue landfill had been fully remediated. Thank Mr. Shaw. Now, this would be another one, and I will kind of probably stop at this topic for now unless conversation leads us somewhere else later. But so extensive fill from 3M across the street at that time. Now, my understanding is it's kind of rock flour often. Now, that in itself wouldn't necessarily concern me, but I guess where my question would be is this report states that the sand at the site is very colored, and that's actually, I talked to some former Connor Forest Industries employees who had worked there, and they said they noted a green color kind of all over when you dug down. So what I would be concerned about is if those had already been dyed, what was in the dye, and could we just go to the next one, and that will be it. So interestingly, Joe Jean, the Public Works Director in around 1989, had actually asked the DNR, he asked for the parameters to run on dyes contained in 3M waste. And the DNR told him cobalt, chrome 6, total chrome, cadmium, lead, and copper. Now, I do not know if that's actually in the dye or if that was just the DNR saying, hey, test for all of these, because that would be a good idea just on any type of dye like this. But I think we could also be cautious of if there is any heavy metal in that fill, because it's prevalent throughout the entire site from what the documents state. Now, for the sake of brevity, I will not go into detailed history of industrial operations in this neighborhood. We are already familiar with a lot of it, and so is the public. If push comes to shove, however, and the city insists on going down a direction where they are supporting any type of industrial expansion, whether it's from 3M or Colby, then I will indeed be forced to go into a very nuanced history of those operations in the neighborhood, along with contamination history and so forth. So hopefully we do not have to go there. But on that note, I've already had the chance to incidentally gather some input from people around the neighborhood, because there was a large item drop-off and there were a few issues, so I was out and about, and others had come and tried to help from the city, and so I was out talking to residents anyway. And I think a few things are clear from the input I've gathered so far, and many are senior citizens who've lived there, 40 to 60 years, so I think they deserve our respect and deference. I think any industrial expansion from 3M or Colby would just be off the table immediately. And so Alder Rasmussen had brought up, and I think she was correct, that back in the day, spot zoning used to be commonplace. So, you'd have industrial operations right next to residential neighborhoods. And boy, if you go in the DNR files, you will see that is a very bad idea. And it's not one that we want to further any more than we have. So it's caused severe problems, these industrial operations in our neighborhood. It's caused severe health problems. It would really be on the unholy trinity side, when you look at Wausau Chemical, Walico, Connor Forest Industries, real notorious past. So the neighborhood's not going to go there. I would urge my colleagues to kind of respect the history there and just realize that's not going to be workable. And then also the housing item, I think the more it goes to a large-scale housing project, the deeper and more complex the environmental process is likely to get. And again, you know, some of the residents I talked to just were astounded when they heard that a residential development may be put there. So I would really, I think, urge that we look at kind of singularly the community partners proposal, and I would put my full support behind that, contingent on a constituent input that they feel it's a good idea, and then the environmental components, making sure that everything's checked out sufficiently for that type of project, and then just those basic concerns of lighting and police patrols. But I think we have the chance to do something Wausau needs and wants. That's something the district and neighborhood would want, and also start to send the message, hey, we might have made some mistakes in the past with the layout of industry and residential areas, but we're recognizing that, and we're not going to make it any worse. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say I agree with everything Mr. Killian said. So somebody write this down, because this is something that he and I completely agree on. And so, but honestly, with this site from day one, we need to do a lot of research. And the stuff we see up here is exactly why. 3M fill is common in that entire neighborhood, not just even on this site. And nobody knew what 3M fill really was. It's just that, you know, you'd be digging out in yards and you find 3M fill. And they produced an awful lot of it over the years. And, you know, spot zoning is the reason we have this. I mean, at that time when they would site a factory in a neighborhood, a lot of the people who worked in the factory lived in the neighborhood. But times have changed, and now we have a business campus for just that purpose, and we're trying to make our neighborhoods less industrial, not more industrial. And with regard to the idea of lighting and people's perception of safety, even if an area is safe, if people don't think it is, it's not, because if they don't feel safe, they're not going out. So I think that's something that we can take up in the SISM committee. 3 of us are also on that committee. And, you know, whether we maybe look for some block grant funding or something that we can use to enhance that neighborhood, we'd have to look and take an inventory of what lighting is there, see what we can do on existing poles. And because that's cheap. If public service puts a light on a pole that's already there, that's not expensive. Decorative lighting, super expensive. So we can look at that in SISM separately. But I think if we're going to develop the site to its highest and best use, which I think the community partners proposal is, the added lighting component should be part of that, because people coming to that area for services also need to feel safe, especially if they're coming on foot. So, you know, I think that, you know, if there's a minor industrial use, let's say boxcar storage in a little area, or some trailers maybe on the far south end, that's different because it's an ancillary operation to something that's already there, but it's not a plant expansion. It's not an operational expansion of those businesses. So as good neighbors, if they could work together, I think that's amenable probably to that neighborhood, but certainly not more industry. And, you know, I think that we really should start to look at alternative sites for the Dana Capital proposal right away. I think that's too much housing for what we've got going on there, you know, in that neighborhood. And you know, we just don't know what the environmental looks like there. Where are we at on the phase 2? Did we get the phase 2?
No, again, so I think, you know, the challenge is that the completion of the phase 1, you know, was discussed. You know, the phase 1 recommends no additional testing. You know, the city environmental engineer has noted that, you know, we're unsure of where to proceed on this. If you want, the recommendation from them is that we should, you know, highlight a list of, and perhaps this presentation is the list of the things that you want tested. And if you want it tested at just various locations across the site, or some, you know, kind of proposed plan to choose the locations, then we could go get a quote to have additional phase 2 testing done, which, you know, may or may not be expensive, but we can bring that back if that's what the
Phase 2
committee wants.
typically is not super expensive when we've done it before, but that list is at least the list, and I think at the very least, the testing needs to happen on the proposed site where the community partner project would sit. where their building is and where their area is. If we have an area at the southernmost edge where we're going to park some trailers on, that's probably less of an issue. I mean, if we want to do some spot testing, that's one thing. But I think the area where you're going to have, people working and coming for services, that's really where we would want to test for
Okay.
at least what's on that list.
So just to clarify, is it,
It's
you
both.
saying
It's-
this
It's
list
that
and
whole
the
list,
back
because
list?
that's the component of the furniture treatments, and the other list is the 3M stuff.
Okay.
So I feel like it's both lists.
Well, I believe that, first of all, even though REI, our consultant, didn't really think there was a need for extra testing, Mayor Milky agreed to conduct extra testing. The question then being, as I mentioned earlier, where particularly and for what particularly. I'd just like these questions to be, run past Mr. Lindman in Public Works and to come back with, his take on it in terms of.
Again, the city's environmental engineer has been clear to not recommend any additional testing. But that doesn't mean that the committee can't, request
Yes,
additional
but
testing.
we're looking
so-
at potential for doing it, so that being the
Exactly.
case.
So running it by them, though, just to be clear, it's not something that anyone wants, but we can create this list from this presentation and get a quote, for the testing.
I'll
And
just repeat that, that Mayor Milky did essentially
Sure.
promise that such testing would take place, so I just don't want that to go by the wayside.
the key is just determining test for what and where. That's the
That's-
concern.
That's
And at
it.
the time, he was pretty clear on the fact that once we have some proposals in hand, that we wanted to know more about the site. I mean, I think we all were in agreement on that, and if we found anything on the site that was not safe, it was either remediated or we were not offering up the site, because we've been stuck with this
Right.
land for a long time.
Right.
But I'm not going to sell somebody a piece of land or give somebody a piece of land that's not safe. I mean, absolutely not for housing, but even for the other use.
Alder Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and thank you for the input from my colleagues, and I'll just be, distill it down into something even more clear and explicit, perhaps. So, yes, there are the contaminants listed. There are also the exploratory trenches that are listed. So, in an ideal world, we would not be entertaining any development on a former Connor Forest Industries industrial property, okay? So it wasn't just this one. They were notorious with the Department of Justice. The workers would say from that company, where Connor goes, nothing grows. I mean, they had a notorious reputation. So just to put that out there, this is not an ideal situation, but since we are in this situation and not at the request of my residents or constituents, and certainly not myself, I would then ask that one, it's with 3M and Colby, the district is going to ask if this is backed up by my constituents as well, that there is not, whether it's secondary, tertiary, any part of that operation that is not expanded onto this parcel, because it just sends the message and welcomes more expansion in the future. And I don't think that's a good idea. And then also, with the trenching even, I mean, so another reason I think the community partners proposal is really positive is because any potential, residential use, if you want to call it, a staying overnight at Catholic Charities, it's quite limited compared to other aspects of other proposals. So, but we do have the opportunity, and this should have been done in 1986, to go back and do a thorough investigation of this property. That includes the trenches. I don't care what the city can get away with technically in a legal fashion. I really don't give a darn. And I don't care about the optics of doing something just to do it. Now that we're in this bad position with this property that we were left in by the former Connor group, let's get it done. And then I think it's a real feather in the cap for this committee and the council and this administration that we've gone where others did not go. and really, this has been such a big problem historically, the environmental issues, that I know this is a significant challenge, but if we're just optimistic, we can see that there's a chance for a very big victory here. So thank you very much for your support.
Okay, thank you for your input. Alder Peckham is with us too online, and he's got his hand up, so go ahead, Pat. Can't hear you yet, Pat, so hold on.
He knows how to unmute himself, so let him do it. Because every time you click it, he clicks it. There you go.
Can't hear you yet, Pat.
No. Sound?
Sure.
So do we need a motion to pursue like quotes for the environmental testing?
We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know if you need, I mean, you could direct staff to go do that, but if you want to formalize it and say, that's fine too, I think. I'm not sure it requires a motion, but you certainly could if you want. That's, sure, yeah.
Hey, Pat, try now.
Okay,
There you
Okay,
go.
we can hear you. Thank you.
Welcome.
very good, thank you. I know non-committee member, but what I was going to say is that I think you're really zooming in on the attempt that the committee had when we started this RFP process for this questionable property. That was to really kind of make as close as we could get to a final decision on who would be going in there. And then the city pretty much, the intent at that point was whatever testing you want to make this happen, the city's going to cover it. And the city will be cooperate and do whatever testing is deemed appropriate for whatever use is proposed. So I think you guys are getting there for sure. So congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, the question comes to the floor, do we need a motion for sending staff back to look at the testing issue? I don't know that we need a motion. I mean, is there consensus on the board? It seems like there is, so you know what it is we're talking about, so.
Well, yeah, if I can use then this presentation, the information you have here
Right.
as the benchmark to share and receive, we'll go out and get some quotes and ideas about that.
I'll pass you along a less choppy version, Mr. Schock, if that works, so that it's a little clearer than that PDF. Thank you.
Okay, let's move right along if we can. Is that all right? Anything further from the committee on this? All right, number 5, discussion and possible action on the previous proposals received for the Thomas Street Phase 2 remnant parcels. And our purpose tonight is not to consider the proposals again, but to talk about the public engagement aspect, if I'm understanding the intent of staff.
Correct, yes. Just to clarify, so right before everything kind of changed, and we had received a proposal, we had an open RFP round, received a proposal for the Phase 2 remnant parcels, 2 proposals, and, there was some initial dialogue, but then, the committee at the time had, kind of thought of having some public input. Well, then we went into the situation where there has been very limited opportunities for public input, so we wanted to agendize this again in an effort to, kind of get your opinion on what would you like to do from a public input perspective, what's practical, are you recommending that we should have, some ideas would be to have, or to go to the neighborhood meeting, although many of the neighborhood meetings aren't meeting currently, obviously, but we could try to, there's a lot of ways to slice this. We just wanted to bring it up and have open dialogue about what you would like to do to to have any feedback, either on the two proposals that are out there or any other, if you wanted to reopen the RFP or something like that, that would also be an option.
Well, Alder Killian, in his pre-Alder days, was a proponent of, significant public engagement on this issue. Just to begin, do you have, in the current state of affairs, a vision of how we might go forward that effectively?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize to everyone. I did not intend to monopolize the floor here. These are two very big issues for the neighborhood there, so thank you for this opportunity. And yes, I think the main idea was to have a robust kind of public involvement, public input process. I think an event had been mentioned now that was prior to a world pandemic, and I think that threw a wrench in the machine on that. But I suppose as much citizen input as we could gather on this would be positive. And I think on other committees and other city things, there are challenges right now in doing that because it's hard to set up such meetings. So I'd be willing kind of to hear what my colleagues have to say on that. And then also Mr. Schock had mentioned about the RFP, and I'd be it's unfortunate that Ms. Tao isn't here tonight because she had been the older person when similar blinker ADA-fix proposal had gone forth, and she had some resident feedback, but Alder Larson is here from that district, and I'd be interested just to hear if he has any input on the similar project on the west side, so we know how it turned out for those residents. But given the kind of the level of worry about some of these duplexes and townhomes on the west side, and also, and I think you'll all appreciate this, we talk a lot about affordable housing and the need for affordable housing. Well, in this neighborhood, when the blinker townhomes and duplexes went up, if I'm not mistaken, the rents were sometimes between $1,200 and $1,400 a unit per month, and that's just very difficult for many people in this part of the district. And what I guess I certainly do not want to see is any type of gentrification process in the district. Development does not necessarily mean gentrification. So if the chair feels it's a good idea, I'd be interested in hearing Alder Larson either now or at some other time in the future. But what is the possibility if it looks like the community feels like it would be interested in hearing other options for development in that area? If development is going to happen, would it be possible to say reopen the RFP or look at a variety of options? Like, here are duplex options, but here are maybe single-family home style options. I mean, is that even viable? That would be my question to the committee. I think it may be positive.
Well, we often run into this, proposals and, development potentials are largely, market-driven. Developers look at, what they might do so that, what they might get out of it. With the low potential probably for, a totally publicly funded, low-income housing project per se. You can look through the CDA and see what might be possible, but you're largely looking at the private sector to come forward. Now, are there funding sources that can help them accomplish sort of what you're thinking about? And I'm sure there's some out there, Mr. Schock can speak to that. But, ultimately then proposals come to our committee and they have to be looked at on their merits, and the proposals often are market-driven. So, Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. With regard to public engagement, we've had some good luck before, whether it was with, design charrettes or planning meetings or whatever, taking our show on the road and not necessarily funneling everybody that has an interest in here to see a map. And so depending on whether or not, I mean, obviously an outdoor event is weather dependent, but what outdoor events are safer. So, if there would be interest within the neighborhood, assuming that the neighborhood would maybe want to have a neighborhood meeting, or whether interested stakeholders would just want to see those plans, I would certainly think that an outdoor viewing could be scheduled. Now, whether it's scheduled over at the remnant parcels, where this is going to be, because people will kind of know where that is, or whether you had it at 3M Park, or, elsewhere. I mean, you could even have it at City Hall Park if people want to come downtown. But I think that if you want to gather people together, that's maybe a safer way to do it. Maybe I think having it in their neighborhood makes sense. When we had the water plant meetings in my neighborhood, and we had them at NTC, the district totally appreciated that because they didn't have to go far. And so maybe we would look at something like that to stimulate some public engagement, and maybe do it a couple nights so that you don't have a huge crowd all at one time. Have kind of an open house format, people can kind of come and go. And if we are looking for single-family home options, we have a developer that's building some along the Sherman Street remnants that's doing a great job. Now, we didn't get a proposal from them on these. What I will say is that the ones that built on the west side of Thomas Street leased up as fast as they could build them, and they're still building them. Now, that said, their surrounding neighbors may not love them, but it seems like whatever they're putting up is renting at market rate as fast as they can construct it. Now, that tells me that that type of product doesn't need a whole lot of incentive from either a city standpoint or a TID incentive. Normally, but for a public-private partnership, a project can't take flight. These are taking flight without us, whether we help or not. And so I guess I would not be as amenable to substantially assist, that type of project, knowing what success it's had in the past. They're not empty. There's a waiting list for them. So that on the money side, and I don't think we have a need for closed session on this either, because I'm just not afraid to say that here, but we've observed that that's been happening in their other projects. There's a huge demand.
Okay.
But on the public engagement side, maybe an outdoor event.
Okay, thank you. Alder Larson has his hand up.
Yes, and in regards to what I've heard from constituents on these properties is they're not really welcome in the neighborhood. They're being is that they're new, they look pretty, but they don't fit the neighborhood. They don't fit the structures, don't fit the style of the neighborhood. Here you've got this humongous building next to small homes. You've got problems with driveways. The driveways are at such a pitch. On some of them, you need to almost put a chalk block underneath your parked car because for fear of rolling out on the street. We recently had also complaint about a parking lot. There's a driveway that's not even long enough to accommodate a tenant's truck who is in violation because it's hanging over the sidewalk. And I am also meeting with a constituent tomorrow about the parking issues that they have with a building that's newly constructed and seeing if I can bring some kind of proposal to the CISM committee in the future. Like I said, I'm meeting with him tomorrow. And myself as a bordering alderman and as a homeowner in the district too, and I have family that lives there. My main concerns first and foremost is getting that land tested, because you're talking about putting up properties right alongside a known brownfield, and just as we were talking about the former Connor business, if you're going to put residential people there, you need to make sure that that land is safe to be putting on there first and foremost. And second of all, I would like to see something more that fits the neighborhood. I mean, structures that more fit the neighborhood. I live over on Sherman Street, right off of Sherman Street, and they've just built 4 homes there along the Sherman Street parcels that were left over from when they widened that street. They're attractive homes and they fit the neighborhood. The structures fit the neighborhood. They look like they belong. The ones on Thomas Street, they don't look like they belong there. They're huge, they're awkward, and I would also like to see the rental history on them too. If there's any way we could track that to see if these buildings are actually being full, because I specifically know of when I was out campaigning, I saw some empty units there, And I also know of a person who just recently moved in and moved out because it was too high. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Hi, I just want to give you a little bit of feedback on the community input aspect. We've been trying to do a lot of new things here. So I think what could benefit us is if we put together a video of this proposal, if we had a press release. You know, we asked for input on the parks situation. We got tons. So we can do this. I would say we put together a video, we play it on public access, we put it on all of our social media and website channels, and invite people to give that feedback to us, give them a deadline, and then either they can maybe be involved in a WebEx type discussion with you, or maybe you answer these questions as they come up. I think we have the technology to do this. I think you're right with the maybe holding some stuff outside, but we could do a whole combined effort here and get as much input as we can the safest way we can. So just my 2 cents. I'm willing to help.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Alder Peckham has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me again?
Yep.
Very good. I just wanted to throw out the possibility, I think it's a good idea for some sort of community gathering or opportunity for the neighbors to see what might be planned for that Phase 2 Thomas Street area. And the Riverside Park has an open-sided shelter. I think that would work quite nicely for that purpose. That's all I got.
All right, good idea. Anything else from the committee? Alder Killian?
So in closing, I think that all these suggestions from my colleagues and the mayor were very good, and I think the online component is valuable, and then also adding that maybe outdoor event would give some who aren't as fond or familiar with the digital workings to have an in-person, although safe with social distancing and masks and so forth, if possible. That way we can make sure to get the biggest inclusion there. So I think that sounds positive. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, so we're asking the administration and staff to put together an information campaign, if you will, and coordinate closely with Alder Killian, too. From his end, he might find ways to disseminate in addition to anything electronic, so, and the live event potential, so. Very good. Alder Rasmussen.
Just one more comment, and I think that with regard to making a video, we should probably reach out to the proposer. They may have some kind of 360 renderings that they could give for that, versus the paper copies that were submitted with the RFP. They may have something better that you could use without making your own.
Sure, yeah.
It is good to bear in mind, too, I think, the proposal we had for Thomas Street included parking access from behind along the alleyway rather than driveways off of Thomas Street. So that would, address that one concern there of Alder Larson. So, all right, move on. Looks like we're going to move on. Number 6, discussion and possible action on the proposal received from Cherry Street Dental for a proposed commercial office building in the River Life area. Mr.
Great.
Schock?
Yes, so we've received a proposal for, as you know, the River Life area is a large, kind of large piece of property, some of which is obviously under development now from the current developers, some of which has an option for the current developers to continue developing, and some of which is unassigned. It's still parcels that are in theory available for additional proposals. We haven't necessarily re-RFP'd it, but it's out there. I know that the proposers are available as well. If you have questions for them, the proposals in your packet. We summarize some of the considerations. I'll go through some of those here if you want to just kind of look up at the screen, from the staff's perspective. Obviously we welcome proposals, but this particular use is not necessarily strategic. They request incentives and land for a discounted rate, obviously for free. And, normally we have obviously only done projects or only done, incentives on projects where, the use is listed in the strategic statement of the city that you guys have adopted. So we're, making an effort to do that. This use is perhaps appropriate, but not necessarily strategic. It would preclude the housing project that had been discussed previously for that quadrant. So one thing we want to do tonight is kind of determine your interest in either, opening an RFP perhaps, or, having the two proposals kind of make their final and best offers so that you could weigh them together. We had received a proposal for this parcel previously for, townhome development essentially at this location. The incentive request is perhaps high given the size of the building. While it is a somewhat valuable building from a taxable perspective, it's not very large, and they have assigned no value to the to the land in a purchase price situation. The private parking is perhaps large. There's a large parking lot that they're proposing to build. We've discouraged large private parking lots in the River Life area. We've only done shared parking and tried to reduce the amount of parking in that area. That's always a challenge. Parking is diametrically opposed to walkability, so you're always trying to balance the two considerations, in urban environment, and so we're always trying to do that. So it seems like a lot of parking. And, the design itself, the building and the site design is perhaps a bit more suburban than we'd normally encourage. We'd like to see something more urban or, reflect kind of some of the urban nature of some of the other riverfront projects in the River Life area. But obviously, they're interested in hearing your feedback tonight. We don't necessarily recommend a decision right away, but guidance on, what we might do. And so we've recommended a few potential steps here. If you wanted to kind of open a short RFP window, that would allow both interested parties to kind of re-clarify their intentions and their requests. We could receive a commercial appraisal on the land that might help you understand, the value associated with either selling the land for a reduced price or giving it away, for a particular project. I think one other goal is to maybe recommend that the, our proposal be reviewed by the Planning Commission, which meets in 2 weeks, so that they could also comment, because this would be a change of use from the original planned unit development, which was approved in the area which had housing on this specific site. And it's not hard to change the PUD, but it does go through a public process, and so we do want feedback on kind of adapting or changing the use.
Thank you. Well, when this, when I first saw this proposal, kind of caught me off guard because it seemed like, what, where, from the get-go, I've had this vision in my mind, because we've seen the overall overview type illustration showing, the townhomes in that area there. So that's always, what I thought would probably end up happening there. Without that, some sort of mixed-use building that might have some retail and some service and aspects to it, might be a nice second choice with architecture, befitting the area. I did notice that, it seemed like the maximum occupancy of this proposed building looked like about 32 people, but there's like 42 parking stalls. So I thought there was an overly large parking area myself. So that's assuming that, that they're going to have 100% occupancy of patients at any given time. So my first blush is I agree with the considerations, and I welcome the recommended next steps. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I guess I'll be the first one to say I don't feel that this project is the highest and best use for riverfront property. Riverfront real estate is a short-lived commodity for us, and if we develop it by taking the first project that comes along for, based on an RFP, we will be out of land before we know it. And, I have difficulty offering city-funded incentives on a dental clinic. There are literally dozens of locations where a professional office building can exist in the city of Wausau with no challenges, no geological challenges, no site prep challenges, none. And, aesthetically, there's also a dozen locations in the city where this particular building designed as is would fit, but it isn't urban enough to fit with the other real estate that's been happening down there. This committee a few years ago flat refused incentives to Wausau Smiles when they were building up on that ridge on 17th Avenue for a heightened level of landscaping or whatever it was, knowing that that project would build somewhere in the city, whether we helped it along or not. And, I don't know if this is the same situation, but I have difficulty incentivizing commercial office space because first, we have an abundance of commercial office space in the city already, and there's so many other places where it can go. And I feel like we want to, based on land use, reserve that riverfront property for the strategic vision that we had for the riverfront. We purchased the riverfront with public funds to make sure that it was a great mix of public-private partnerships that everyone can benefit from. And, aesthetically, doesn't everyone want to work down there for the view? But to give away a parcel like that in a key area, even if it's got some site challenges, whether it be footings or whatever, I just don't feel like this is the use at this time. And I would either re-release the RFP in its entirety, or I would look for another site for this proposal and wait on the site in question. Because there's so much else happening down there, and we are kind of nearing the finish line with that stretch already with projects that have been approved. And, we've received so much positive feedback for the aesthetics and the mix of what's already down there. I actually received resident feedback today on this proposal that was seen in the packet, asking me how this fits with what river life has been defined as. And it doesn't. It doesn't. So as written, I would not support this project. So I think we either need to re-RFP it, because if we're going to score this proposal against the other one, how is it going to outscore the other proposal? If we wipe the slate clean and issue new proposals, that's maybe what we need to do.
Are you
But this
willing to make a
isn't it.
motion for the committee?
I guess my motion would be to either respectfully decline this proposal or to issue a new RFP.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, if you do have questions, they'd be available to answer them. And then, I think the goal is to provide this feedback, right? To provide the commentary about design, about, parking, about these considerations, and the broader use question, and kind of say, all right, these are the considerations of staff and the committee's considerations. And, our recommendation might be to have a short RFP, even if it's a month, because we've received, now 2 proposals for that area, and, allow them to, kind of come back with final and best, kind of offers. Both have requested some level of incentives, both have, both would add significant taxable value, but we do have to, kind of consider that and consider, those debates. And so let them come back with final and best offers, and then, kind of consider that.
I think we need to cast a wider net, though, because if we're just going to go back to 2 proposers and say, bring us your best, they're both going to go back to the drawing board and try their best. There could be a proposal number 3 or 4 that we've not seen yet that we need to know about.
Sure.
And so I would like us to just
Well,
start fresh on this one.
you started to make a motion that had kind of like an either-or in it. I'd really like to see a motion of
Okay.
what you want us to
So
do.
my motion would be that we do not act upon this proposal and that we reissue the RFP and cast a wider net and seek multiple different proposals.
Thank you. Do I have a second from the committee? I have a second from Alder Watson. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And none are.
Just to clarify, when would you like it due? Because if we'll go ahead and get it out on the street. So usually we set the due date, with your consultation. Would you like to match the due date that we have for, what did we just issue? We just issued The near north area as
Yep.
well.
What's
So
the date
I-
on that one? Is it
I think
August?
it was due 8/1. Is that what we said?
I didn't know if you said it.
I think we did.
I thought that's what it said in the packet.
yeah.
That's certainly a sensible
Hold on.
timeframe.
I think it was in here. Let me just verify. Yes. 8/1 proposals are due. So are you okay with that?
And then we could see them at our August meeting then the following week, ish?
Yes, I think, let me just verify to be sure that, because I do, I'm sure, all the parties are, also planning for, right, their current construction cycle, and so we do want to be thoughtful about the, August 1 is a Saturday, I don't think we want that. Maybe, yeah, 8/10 is not, here, hold on. I don't know where those dates came from, right? 'Cause it's 8/10 would be, I don't know. Okay, sorry, let's, what about if we said, and if we could even go back to this one, which has already been approved, but good thing we checked. If we could say July 31st, that's a Friday.
Yep.
And then August 4th would be our August meeting. So if everyone's okay, we'll follow that timeline for both of those.
That seems reasonable, because I think, no matter how we look at it with the proposal, a land giveaway or a land transfer for a low price is still a city-funded incentive. And so if we're going to do that, we need the highest and best possible use.
There was also a land, a prep ask too that was
Correct.
considerable.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I think
Great.
we've
Do we
got
need
that
to-
in hand.
Do we need to vote then yet on that? Was that?
No, we did do.
I think you did, I
Yeah,
was
we did
just
vote.
asking to
We did vote,
clarify.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've gone through those items, and we can go right back down to, and no need for closed session, down to updates, Mr. Schock.
Sure, so just quick updates. Obviously, we're aware of ongoing planning at Wausau Center in collaboration with the Wausau Opportunity Zone Fund, the owner of the mall. Obviously, the world continues to change around retail as if it wasn't worse enough. Now it's, even greater impacts with the pandemic and whatnot. So, but they have hired a firm, Epstein Ewan Associates, a large, kind of master planning firm, which has a lot of experience in urban redevelopment projects and especially malls. And so they're working on various, kind of alternative designs or alternative ideas about redesign of the mall. And I think, as they kind of zero in on certain ideas that they think are practical and that are, are interesting, from that perspective, we will continue to work with them from a staff perspective, but then also, obviously, have an opportunity for, council input and public input on the process as well. On the North Riverfront area, this is the area that is, the former Great Lakes Cheese site, basically, north of Wausau Avenue to Winton Street. We've been working with the site planner for the past couple months to lay out this area, potentially, in what we've been calling a unified site plan that would incorporate some of the different uses that were proposed in that area through the initial RFP round. We've not heard back from Karma Brewing on their timeline. We know that the Founders Restaurant will not pursue or not go forward, at this time. And obviously, restaurants as a whole is a real difficult business model at the moment anyways. But the housing project is still, in consideration. Their team is still working. They're still planning to do that project, and to phase in that. And that project involved essentially townhomes, potentially along that area. So we will bring at a future meeting, kind of the unified site plan draft, which we're now close to finalizing. I think it does reserve some space for a commercial project like Karma Brewing if they ever wanted to pull the trigger and do it when things change a little bit. And it also incorporates, kind of appropriately scaled housing, for that area. So that'll be a future meeting consideration. But if you have any questions on the, kind of the project, we can answer them now, or I can provide you more information by email if you like.
I have one question on that. With regard to that housing project now, that developer is aware of the design concerns that we had with that plan originally as far as wanting that designed with two fronts and urban aesthetics.
Correct.
And, minimize the
Yep.
the
So-
siding and all of the things that we complained about in the meeting?
Yep, I think they know all of your feedback, and they
Okay.
have hired an architect to, to help address that, or to help, kind of come up with, they have an architect and the contractor have been working together, and they are, we haven't seen kind of their final, what they will propose, but some of it was depending on how much land we would be able to allocate towards, their project in the unified site plan, and we now have a pretty good idea about that once we lay out the roads and the other uses in the area.
One thing I don't want to see the Barrel House is still under development, but the one thing I don't want to see is with Founders pulling out, a massive expansion of that particular project, because we need a diversity of mix down
Yep.
there. And I don't feel that they should have it all, or feel like they're entitled to it all.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's our goal. That's why we want to reserve some parcels for commercial development, even if it's not Founders or Karma, because we do want the area to feel lively, and you don't want it to just feel like all residential, right?
Right,
And that's always,
absolutely.
the goal is that the riverfront, yes, is a vibrant area that's a mixed use, mixed area.
Well,
So-
originally, that user wanted as much land as he could get, and all
Sure.
of it is not on the table, so.
Yep, and we'll bring back that plan in the future, and you can, of course, comment on it then
Okay.
about the differential, although I think it's moving in that direction.
Okay.
Yep. Any questions on that? So then, I just wanted to highlight the Wausau Cares loan program, or loan and grant. There's, particularly, we've partnered with McDevco, our longstanding, administrator of many of our small business grants and loans. And, the mayor has announced a new program that we have, called Wausau Cares, mainly because it does come from the federally funded CARES Act through the CDBG, or Community Development Block Grant Program. As you know, that was reviewed by the Community Advisory Committee and then recommended to finance and then approved by council. And so those resources are now available. The application is open now. Small businesses and small organizations can apply on McDevco's site for that particular program. It's just for entities in the city. It is a grant and a forgivable loan, so this is, additional resources that complement the already, existing federal programs like the Payroll Protection Program and the SBA type of programs which are out there. This is a very specific grant program that really is meant to be tailored to help the smallest businesses, and especially businesses that haven't received funding from other federal programs, and large loans and other things. So we're excited to, to continue to promote that program, and then, we'll be obviously reporting back as time goes on about, how the grants were distributed and what they've been used for. Any questions on that?
I have just a feedback comment. I love the Wausau Cares branding on that. I think that that ties it uniquely to our community. It sends a signal that, we want to help our businesses get back up and running again. I see today that the mayor has a video up about that, which is really, really good. Talks about the fact that it's now time for businesses to get up on their feet again. And I think just the positive vibe surrounding that. The video's up on social media now, but I think that outreach and tying it back to our brand is key. It really, really looks good.
Okay, any other questions? Great. I just wanted to verify, I have some extra copies of the department overview that we went over during the council training. If you hadn't received a hard copy of it, or, you had any questions, I wanted to, kind of reiterate that again, to please look it over and then let us know, if you saw something in there, a particular program, a summary of something done in the past, or, how things operate, please let us know so that we can provide you more information. We're obviously very proud of the work that the department does, and the more you learn about it, I'm confident you will be as well, so. And then department staffing, I was saving that to the end so I could just kind of duck out, but thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for your very kind comments. It's been a great pleasure to be here in Wausau for, nearly the past 6 years, and I really appreciate the opportunity to, to work with 3 different mayors and a variety of different councils, and really participate on a lot of important projects for the future of the city. So I wish you guys all the best, obviously, as you continue the fight. Thanks.
And again, thank you so much for your assistance personally with me, to help me along as chair of this committee. For this committee itself, you've been a great resource, and just your service to the city. So thanks a lot. That being said, we're at the end of our agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, I have an arm up. Please come up, sir.
Hi, I was wondering.
Come on up to the dais if you would. Just give us your name and address.
Sure. Stop here.
No, you can come up to the microphone there. It's okay.
Hi, my name is Kevin Noel, 156064 Town Line Road, Wausau.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I wasn't sure when to provide public input.
This is
but
fine.
I'm here on behalf of Community Partners Campus, along with my partner, Brian Gumness. And so we began this endeavor to develop the campus about 16 months ago. And I feel like even 16 months ago was 2 years too late. So we're really behind the 8 ball, not only in timing with the services that our community nonprofits are trying to provide to the citizens, but with the timing of the fundraising and the level of fundraising ahead of us. And to that end, I just wanted to see if I could describe some of the needs, and it may actually be an emergency for our community. I know that the neighbor's place without air conditioning is suffering loss of cornflakes because today's humidity is ruining their food. Catholic Charities only has room to house 25 individuals on any given night. As of last winter, they needed room for 50. As of this winter, they're going to need room for 100. And I'm not sure how we're going to go about doing that. I know that Dick Holster was generous enough to help Catholic Charities out with the YWCA. Blessings in a Backpack has accepted 2 new schools. They're up to 2,000 children every weekend packing food for them in a room that's about 30 by 40. And when you get 30 volunteers in there trying to pack that many backpacks, it's a really hard thing for them to do. The First Presbyterian Free Clinic has been patient in waiting for a facility. They were going to build their clinic in the basement of the church across the street, but Community Partners Campus has been in their sights for the development of their facility in order to provide medical to the community. So we feel like we want to get moving, and I understand the steps that government needs to take in order to make sure that you're doing the best decision for the greater good of the entire community. I wanted to ask you, because I don't know a lot about a lot of things, so I try to surround myself with really smart people. But the phase 2 that was discussed for the Cleveland site, do I understand that it is kind of public works right now, kind of looking into it, or you're proceeding with a phase 2? Because it appears that any one of the proposals that you accept, that might be a requirement that you do that?
Sure. I guess, just to clarify, so we don't have, there's no kind of budgeted item or anything to necessarily undertake Phase 2, so we guess we need to, kind of come back to the committee, kind of say like, here's the proposal to do Phase 2 testing for the items that you've, that you've highlighted in the areas that you've highlighted essentially. And, kind of you give the go-ahead, yes, do that testing. It may require a budget modification, which would go through finance to the council. It may, it most likely would require a budget modification, my guess is, if it doesn't rise to, if it can be, kind of inserted into a current budget item, then it may not be, but I would doubt it would.
I think it's also, part of that, looking for the need and where you might do it and how you might go about it can be based in large part on, the proposed use, the footprint, the method of construction, full slab, versus digging down and putting in a subterranean garage or whatever. These issues come into play as well, so.
So we can't start fundraising until we find a home, a place, and have a goal in mind. And so every month we wait.
Right.
Right now, our timeline puts us into a facility in September of 2021. Every 30 days we wait gets us into another winter.
Right. Alder
Just a
Rasmussen.
question, I guess, Mr. Noel, as a potential user of the site, having seen what you saw here tonight with the environmental concerns that we all discussed at length, do you share those concerns? I mean, do you have concerns about building on a site and perhaps hosting services on a site that, there are some question marks as far as what may be under it?
Well, there are certain services that are certainly of a concern. We don't exactly know what our Phase 2 and what our Phase 3 may be. We've had input from Marathon County as well as North Central Healthcare as to what their needs may be. We're not sure if it's going to be a transitional living facility. If it is, on a scale of 1 to 10, our concern is a 10. We just really need to get going, and we're really hoping for the entire site. We understand that we should be collaborating with the other proposers, and we're certainly open to discussions, but it just appears that the needs that keep coming up from all of our nonprofits and in our county government, as well as our city government, are going to well expand beyond that 6.9 acres. And I'm asking you to really consider reserving that for community service to the citizens of Wausau.
Chris, is it possible for us, I mean, historically, when we needed a second meeting in a month, we've often chosen to meet the third Thursday.
Yep.
Would it be possible to get those prices from REI by then, and maybe we could have a second meeting yet in June and maybe move this along? Because if our intention is to approve the community project contingent upon the environmental testing outcome, that would be one hurdle that we can get them over. They can start their process, they know they have a home as long as the environmental is okay. If it's not, they may not want it either, but, if we move along together, would that be possible for a second meeting in June?
Well, sure. So again, back to the question about, third Thursday being the traditional night, but we could choose any night that you'd like to. Third
How-
Thursday is June 8th.
How quickly could we get it?
I'm sure, that, I mean, Eric isn't here, is he? Or Kevin isn't here? No, but I mean, I'll be sure to work with them. I'm sure we can get quotes and a handle around what the expectations would be. So
Okay,
that
well,
you could
let's
make a
settle that on
decision.
email then to set our date, once you get a handle on, the
Sure,
time
but
that
I'm
you
sure
need.
the 2 weeks, if you wanted to do third Thursday, we could, or third something,
Yeah, I mean, even anytime that week, really.
But
Okay.
is third Thursday a problem that month in June? It isn't. So it would work. Okay. So why don't we for clarity, set it to be the 18th?
Okay,
And I'm confident that we'll just we'll just make sure that we get the answers we need by the 18th, you know.
Well, then we just have to say goodbye all over again.
Oh, yeah, Jesus. Can I amend my
Thanks a
letter?
lot,
I
Mr.
was,
Nolan.
yeah, I know, like,
The other thing that I'd like to add is maybe in the meantime, myself or one of the other representatives of community partners can get together with Mr. Killian and walk the neighborhood and discuss our plans. And I've even offered the possibility of a neighborhood gathering underneath a canopy at St. Vincent de Paul, which is another huge benefit for the campus to be in close proximity to St. Vincent. I mean, it just really makes a perfect location. Brian, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Is it okay? I'm Brian Gumness with the BA and Esther Greenheck Foundation. My address is 157254 Franklin Street in the town of Wausau. But the BA and Esther Greenheck Foundation has been in existence in downtown Wausau for 20 years. And I know that I have spoken to the council before. Not all of you. I think probably maybe only 3 or 4 of you. But I just want to reiterate what Kevin had said in that the importance of the timing of all of this, and never want to, force decisions unduly. But the longer we wait, the longer it is that we can better serve the community of need. And today, Kevin went through everybody on that list, and St. Vincent, the free clinic, Neighbor's Place, they're all here because they feel and know the importance of what it is that the Community Partners Campus is trying to accomplish. And we started this conversation, as Kevin alluded to, 16, 17 months ago. And we feel we found the ideal place, and in previous conversations with city leaders, it just seems to be that is the location if we can get through some of these hurdles. And the biggest hurdle is the environmental. And we certainly do not want to build on a site that requires remediation if we aren't going to do it. So that is the first true unknown. So as soon as we can get that moving, that would be most grateful. So thank you for your time. I appreciate the moment to say a few words. And I understand that you guys will do what you can to try to move this forward for us. So thank you very much.
And thank you for your patience and sitting here the whole evening before we're getting a chance to speak. Appreciate it. Okay.
Yes, I will respond to that as well, given I'm the representative for the district and others also responded. Yes, I appreciate the time frame and the urgent needs in the community, and they would be a lot less urgent had they been addressed by municipal government years ago, and that's very unfortunate. Same goes for environmental. The people in my district have not just been waiting for 16 months, they've been waiting probably over 40 years, so for the environmental to be remediated. So I appreciate your time frame. Thank you very much. And I do support it. It is contingent. My support is contingent on my constituents' support, and it is contingent on covering the environmental basis. And if those two things don't check out, my support does not check out. So I guess we'll just move along in the positive process that we put together and hopefully gather some citizen feedback and make sure we can deal with Connor's poor environmental history and try to get some positive services out there for the community. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Entertain a motion to adjourn, please. From Alder Watson, second. From Alder Killian. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you.